The plaintiff appeals from a judgment of the Greene County Court of Common Pleas, which found him guilty of retaliation and sentenced him to 4 years of imprisonment. The state's evidence established the following facts. Susan Johnson had been the plaintiff's parole officer prior to March 1999. In early 2000, Smith was incarcerated at the Pickaway Correctional Institution and apparently did not know that his case had been reassigned to another parole officer. Smith and Johnson had had a somewhat difficult relationship, including an altercation at the parole office that had resulted in his incarceration for a short time, revocation of Smith's parole, and a request by Farthing that he be transferred to a different parole officer. Johnson had also become actively involved in the investigation of a rape of which Farthing had been accused. In April 2000, Smith sent a letter to fellow inmate Brian Lewis through PCI's mail system. Lewis knew Johnson because she had previously served on his parole officer. In the letter, Smith referred to the sexy parole officer about whom he fantasized and stated, "Let's rape Susan J." The letter also indicated that Smith and Lewis would both get to see Johnson, that she was a black widow, and that he wanted to be in her web. This letter caught the attention of the PCI postal inspectors, who forwarded it to a prison investigator. Around the same time, Winona Douglas, a mental health counselor who worked with sex offenders at PCI, interviewed Smith, who was soon to be released. During the interview, Smith exhibited delusional fantasies about Johnson wanting him and stated that he wanted to fuck the shit out of her. He also expressed anger at his treatment by Johnson. Based on her experience with sexual offenders and the combination of sexual delusion and anger that Smith expressed toward Johnson, Douglas concluded that Johnson was in danger and warned her of that danger. On June 22, 2000, Smith was indicted on 1 count each of intimidation, retaliation, and attempted complicity to perjury. Smith pled not guilty and was tried to the court. He was found guilty of retaliation and the other counts were dismissed. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Smith relies on 3 assignments of error on appeal. The state failed to prove venue, an essential element of the instant offense, viz., that the instant offense occurred in Greene County. Smith argues that the state failed to establish proper venue because all of the alleged threats against Johnson were made in Pickaway County, because Johnson lived in Montgomery County and worked out of her car, and because there was no evidence that a written threat could have been communicated to Johnson in her car. Pursuant to RC 2901, the trial in a criminal case shall be held in the territory of which the offense or any element of the offense was committed. As applied to Smith, the offense of retaliation required that he purposefully and by force or by unlawful threat or harm to any person or property retaliate against a public servant who was involved in a civil or criminal action or proceeding, because the public servant discharged the duties of the public servant. Thus, venue was proper if an element of the offense of retaliation was committed in Greene County. According to her supervisor, Johnson supervised anybody under the parole authorities under our jurisdiction in Greene County. The evidence established, however, that Johnson performed her duties primarily in Montgomery County. At oral argument, the parties agreed that the parole authority does not maintain an office in Greene County, and that the courts are not involved in the revocation of parole. Therefore, even though Smith's parole was on account of a Greene County case, there is no evidence that any of Johnson's duties as a parole officer, which prompted Smith's alleged retaliation, were discharged in Greene County. In the absence of such evidence, we cannot find that venue was proper in Greene County. The first assignment of error is sustained. 2. Appellate sic communicated no threat of harm, which is an essential element of the crime of retaliation. Smith contends that he did not make a threat against Johnson because he did not communicate any intention to harm Johnson to her directly or to any third party who could have reasonably been expected to relay the intention to her. No person purposefully and by force or by unlawful threat of harm to any person or property shall retaliate against a public servant, a party official, or an attorney or witness who was involved in a civil or criminal action or proceeding, because the public servant, party official, attorney, or witness discharged the duties of the public servant, party official, attorney, or witness. The retaliation statute does not require that any threat of harm be communicated.
How do you write retaliation?
I had 3 strokes.
What about 2 strokes? Retal-GS.
I don't like that.
Why is that?
Well, because most of the eation, some I do with that, but not with that one for some reason. So how would you write retaliate?
2 strokes.
But it would be hard to read. Retalt. How'd you get